Nigel Briggs says, if the world as we know it ends tomorrow and we have to abandon Earth and start over, if we started in a new Stone Age and could not bring any tools or technology, but we had all of the knowledge we've acquired so far, how long would it take to rebuild civilization back to the point of iPhones and 787s? I love this kind of question. This is the kind of thing I was really looking for. There have been a couple people that have tackled this question. There's 2 books that I can highly recommend on this subject. One of them, relatively recent piece of science fiction. I want to say it was written in the 50s or 60s. It's an amazing book. It really blew my mind. It's called A Canticle for Leibowitz. And basically, it's about the end of the world. I suppose there's a nuclear war or something, and there's nothing but rubble. And it opens in an era of monks and monasteries. And there's a lot of talk about St. Leibowitz. And Leibowitz was just a regular engineer who wrote some things down, and these monks are looking at these books, trying to get the fundamental basics, just trying to get the basics of what it was that this St. Leibowitz was talking about with his so-called electric light. And after generations, I want to say, it's been a long time since I read it, but it's really good. All of these bits of knowledge are preserved and illuminated as manuscripts, as in the Middle Ages, and it's basically about these, monks who are trying to figure out what had happened hundreds of years ago. Again, from memory, it seems like, and what this one engineer, they don't even know what the word engineer means, this St. Leibowitz who wrote some things down about things, and then eventually they strike like an arc light up in the basement, and it's the first time there's been electric light on Earth in hundreds of years, and they're worried it's the devil. And it's a really, 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 really cool book, and it moves in like 2 or 3 different epochs as well. Canticle for Leibowitz. Oh, by Walter Miller. Thank you, Kevin Kilcoyne. That's one book. And another book that goes after this is by my good friend Sam Clemens, who wrote A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And basically the theory there was Twain loved the British. He loved going to Britain. He loved his time in England, but he despised nobility and aristocracy. He just despised it. He thought it was a complete waste of human material and couldn't understand why some of these useless people were given everything, while so many hardworking people were given nothing. So basically what the Yankee, he called it, the Yankee was how he kept referring to the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, was one of the few books he ever published that really got him into trouble with the people he cared about. There were people who didn't like what he said in Huckleberry Finn, which is really probably his only genuine masterpiece, but I think Connecticut Yankee's right up there. But the British really... I think what Twain said about it and what observers said is that by the time he published The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, the British had developed so much love for Mark Twain that they let this one slide, and they still loved him afterwards. But it is an indictment of nobility and royalty. I mean, there's this woman comes in and she wants to be taken to these nobles, and he leads her out. She leads him out, and it's a sty full of pigs, and she couldn't see that they were really pigs. It was pretty sharp commentary. But the fun part of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is it's basically an American Yankee from, late 1800s, I want to say mid to late 1800s, magically transported back to the Middle Ages. And he has all of this knowledge. He knows about steam engines, and he knows about various engineering things and weapons and all this other stuff. So I love this idea. I just think it's a fun idea. I like to think how much knowledge could I preserve, and just me personally, if I were to just be sent back there, or if there was a zombie apocalypse and we had to start from scratch. So I can get into a little more details with your question here, I think. The first thing that would have to happen would be you would have to, in my opinion, because I've given this a fair amount of thought, the first thing you would have to do is you'd have to establish an academy. And you'd have to, as with King Arthur's Court and also with Leibowitz, you would have to protect that academy. You'd have to protect it politically. You'd have to make sure that what happened inside the walls of that academy had the protection of whatever existing political system is in the world outside. If it's a king, you got to make sure that you're developing toys and weapons that the king can use incidentally to everything else, because you need the academy to survive. And if you're in a very, very religious time, such as in Leibowitz, you need to pray a lot and be seen praying a lot, because you're going to be accused of witchcraft and sorcery and all the rest of it, and so on and so on and so on. But in answer to your question, if your question said if we still had all the materials, I think we'd be there in 2 generations at the top end, because we would have to use this kind of what's it called, like the oil drop idea, where you would basically have an academy and you would have whatever survives. You'd have whatever surviving people, whatever surviving knowledge, concentrate it and start kids young. I mean, you'd have to be brutal about this selection process. You'd have to take the most intelligent, the most highly motivated, hardworking kids and just train them in modern thinking while the rest of the world goes to hell. Just train them how to think and teach them how to think. Make as many engineers and as many, engineers, right? I mean, look, if you lose civilization and you hand a guitar to a kid 2,000 years from now, that kid's going to learn how to play the guitar. If he has any musical talent, it's not the same as a guy learning how to build an electric motor. It's artistic talent is latent and can be developed. You don't want to work on that. And number one, you don't need it, right? I mean, if you're out of food and water and you don't have electricity, you don't have shelter, you don't have medicine, then I think the arts will be okay for a while if we're just scratching on, inside of caves and banging on logs for music. Those things kind of take care of themselves. You don't need a tremendous amount of technical information to write a play. I ought to know because I've written a few. But I would concentrate everything on sciences and engineering, and I would train as many kids as I could, and I'd get them up to speed, and then I'd send them out to train other kids. I'd keep bringing them back, and hopefully you'd be able to refine this thing. Now, that's to understand it. I mean, just this iPhone, I mean, just manufacturing this, I know most of you have heard of this. It's a classic story. I think it's called The Story of a Pencil. And basically, the guy who wrote it said, I'm a pencil, and it's a simple little 2-cent pencil. And no one in the world can make one. Because in order to make a pencil, you have to be able to develop the graphite. And the graphite is a series of chemical things that have to happen in a lab. You have to chop down the wood that makes the outside of the pencil, and you have to have a machine to shape the wood. You have to have somebody who not only paints the wood, but somebody who knows how to make the paint and somebody who can prepare the paint. You have somebody who's got to mine the little brass thing that holds the eraser on, and that miner has to get the brass, and it has to be refined and it has to be crimped to the right size. And you have to make the eraser out of the inside of, guys with bad haircuts, I think is where erasers come from. No one can make a pencil. And when you get down to an iPhone, that's 4 or 5 orders of magnitude more difficult. So I think you could preserve the knowledge. The manufacturing base would take longer. And the thing about the iPhone, getting back to the iPhone or something like that, that may take several generations. Although I wouldn't think it would take quite that long. Look, the way you do it is you don't try to start on the iPhone. The iPhone didn't come out of nowhere. You go back to making a spinning floppy disk or a spinning hard drive, and if you can get a hard drive that could save 500 bits of information, yeehaw. The reason we watch these things get smaller and cheaper is not because they just immediately sat out in 1979 to make a 10 gigabyte hard drive or a 17 terabyte hard drive. They made a 500 kilobyte hard drive, then a megabyte hard drive, then a 2 megabyte hard drive, then a 5, then a 10, and we watched it happen. Then there's a 50, now there's 100. 100 costs what the 50 used to cost. Wow, fantastic. It's all incremental. It's all little changes, little evolution, getting things tweaked. So you'd want to preserve that primal information on how to make things happen, and then you worry about people getting them back up to speed and smaller and cheaper and lighter and all the rest of it. You got big problems in a case like that, I think.